The floating market of Porto Novo was a chaotic assault on the senses. It was a labyrinth of wooden planks lashed together over the muddy water, smelling of diesel fumes, frying fish, and unwashed bodies. It was the kind of place where everything was for sale, from contraband electronics to rare animals, and where no one asked questions about where the merchandise came from. Captain Marcus hated it. He stood near a stall selling sacks of farinha, his towering frame casting a long shadow. He wore a faded baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses that hid the constant scanning movement of his eyes. To the locals, he was just another gringo buying supplies. But Marcus wasn't shopping. He was operating. His brain processed the crowd in grids, looking for threats, looking for exits. Max, the large, sable German shepherd at his heel, was equally tense. The dog's ears were pinned back against the cacophony of shouting vendors and revving boat engines. Max pressed his shoulder firmly against Marcus's leg, a tactile check-in. The dog didn't like the energy here. It felt predatory. Marcus paid for his supplies, 2 jerry cans of fuel and a bag of salt, and turned to leave. He wanted to get back to the silence of his shack before the afternoon storms rolled in. He gripped the handles of the heavy fuel cans and began to cut a path through the throng toward his skiff. That was when the anomaly appeared. In a sea of people wearing stained work clothes, flip-flops, and soccer jerseys, a flash of bright, clean color caught his eye. It was a girl, maybe 6 years old. She was wearing a pink dress with a cartoon character on the front, clean, expensive, and completely out of place in the mud of the docks. Her hair was brushed and shiny, tied back with a ribbon. She looked like she had just stepped out of a shopping mall in the capital, not a border town slum. She was walking hand in hand with a man. He was tall, thick-set, wearing a grease-stained tank top and heavy boots. He didn't look like a father. He held her hand not with affection, but with possession. His grip was tight, his knuckles white, pulling her along faster than her small legs wanted to go. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around, sweating more than the heat justified. Marcus paused. He set the fuel cans down. His spidey sense, that gut feeling that kept him alive in Fallujah, was buzzing at the base of his skull. The man dragged the girl past Marcus, heading toward a fast speedboat moored at the end of the dock. The girl looked up. Her eyes met Marcus's. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her face was a mask of terror so deep it had frozen her vocal cords. She locked eyes with the veteran, and then she moved her free hand. She raised it to shoulder height, palm facing out. She tucked her thumb into her palm. Then she folded her 4 fingers down over the thumb, trapping it. She opened her hand and did it again. Thumb, fingers, trap. Marcus recognized it instantly. It wasn't a wave. It was the international signal for help, a distress code popularized on social media for victims of domestic violence and trafficking. A silent scream that says, "I am being held against my will. Help me." The man didn't see it. He was too busy looking at the boat. But Marcus saw it, and Max saw it. The dog let out a low, vibrating growl, sensing the spike in the girl's cortisol levels from 10 feet away. The man yanked the girl toward the edge of the dock. "Come on, quit dragging your feet," he hissed in Portuguese. Marcus's world narrowed down to a single point. The fuel cans were forgotten. The noise of the market faded into a dull hum. He stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't a shopper anymore. He was an interceptor. He took 3 long strides, placing himself directly in the man's path. The man stopped, startled by the sudden appearance of the giant with the scar on his neck. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice calm, deep, and carrying the unmistakable weight of a threat, disguised as politeness. "You dropped something." The man blinked, confused. "I didn't drop anything. Get out of my way." Marcus didn't move. He stood like a boulder in a stream. "I think you did," Marcus said, looking directly at the girl. "You dropped your cover." The phrase, "you dropped your cover," hung in the stagnant, humid air between the 2 men, heavier than the humidity itself. To a civilian bystander, it might have sounded like a nonsensical comment, a confusion of language between a local and a tourist. But words are containers for intent, and the intent Marcus projected was unmistakable. It was an interception. The bustling market of Porto Novo continued its chaotic churn around them. Vendors shouting prices for acai, engines revving, crates thumping against wood. But within the 3-foot radius of personal space where Marcus stood, the world had gone silent. The man holding the girl's hand froze. His name was Bruno, a low-level transporter for a faction that moved product across the triple border. He was used to intimidation. He was used to people looking away when he walked by. He wasn't used to being stopped by a 6'2" wall of muscle with an American accent and eyes hidden behind ballistic Oakley frames. Bruno's brain stalled. The OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. That Marcus mastered was jamming in the kidnapper's mind. He blinked, sweat stinging his eyes, trying to process the threat. Marcus didn't move. He stood in a relaxed, non-aggressive stance that was entirely deceptive. His hands were open, hanging loosely by his sides, near his waist. To the untrained eye, he looked casual. To a professional, he was in the interview stance, hands ready to block, strike, or draw a weapon in less than a quarter of a second. He was dissecting Bruno with the cold precision of a surgeon looking for a tumor. Marcus's eyes, invisible behind the dark lenses, scanned the target. Subject. Male, late 30s, approx 220 pounds. Soft. Overweight, but strong. Hands. Right hand gripping the girl's wrist with excessive force. White knuckles, tendon strain. Left hand twitching near the waistband of his cargo shorts. Threat indicators. Excessive sweating. Diaphoresis. Darting eyes, scanning for exits. Carotid artery pulsing visibly in the neck. Weaponry. There was a bulge at the 4 o'clock position under the grease-stained tank top. The distinctive print of a pistol grip. Likely a Taurus or a cheap Glock clone. Marcus shifted his gaze to the girl. She hadn't moved. She stood paralyzed, her small body rigid. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes wide, pleading. She realized that her signal had been received. The giant with the scar wasn't walking away. A flicker of hope, dangerous, terrifying hope, lit up her face. She tried to pull her hand away from Bruno, a subtle tug, but he yanked her back, his grip tightening until she winced in pain. "I don't know what you're talking about, gringo." Bruno spat, his voice rising in pitch, trying to summon bravado. "Move! I'm in a hurry. My daughter is sick. We need to get to the boat." "Your daughter," Marcus repeated. The words tasted like ash. He looked at the girl. The disparity was screamingly obvious. She was manicured, dressed in boutique clothes, smelling of expensive shampoo. Bruno smelled of stale beer and river mud. There was no genetic echo, no familial resemblance, but more importantly, there was no familial bond. A father guiding a sick child holds her with care, with anxiety for her well-being. Bruno held her like she was a briefcase full of cash he was afraid to drop. "She doesn't look like you," Marcus said calmly. "And she doesn't look sick. She looks terrified." Bruno stepped forward, trying to use his bulk to intimidate. He was big, a bar brawler, used to throwing his weight around. "You got a problem, man?" Bruno snarled, his hand drifting closer to his waistband. "This is none of your business. Go back to your tourist boat before you get hurt." Adensi num. It was the classic escalation of a bully. But bullies rely on fear. And Marcus had had the capacity for fear burned out of him in places far worse than a wooden dock in the Amazon. Marcus took a half-step forward, invading Bruno's intimate zone. He lowered his head slightly, peering over the rim of his sunglasses so Bruno could see his eyes. They were cold, dead, and utterly devoid of mercy. "I'm giving you an out," Marcus whispered, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a rumble that competed with the boat engines. "Let her go. Walk away. Get in your boat and disappear. Do it now, and you keep your teeth. Do it now, and you keep your freedom." Bruno hesitated. He looked at Marcus, then he looked down. That was when he saw Max. Until that moment, the German Shepherd had been a silent shadow at Marcus's side, obscured by the crowd and Marcus's own legs. Now Max stepped forward. The dog didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply materialized, a 90-pound wolf-like creature staring directly at Bruno's crotch. Max's body language was a masterclass in controlled aggression. His tail was high and still. His mouth was closed, lips tight. A low, continuous vibration emanated from his chest, a sound so deep it was felt in the floorboards of the dock rather than heard. The subwoofer growl. It triggered a primal response in Bruno's reptile brain. The man flinched, pulling his leg back. "Call your dog off!" Bruno shouted, his voice cracking. "Is that thing crazy?" "He's not crazy," Marcus said, patting his thigh. Max didn't look at Marcus. He kept his lock on the target. "He's just very protective of children, and he smells your fear. It makes him reactive." The girl looked at the dog. She had never seen an animal like this. In the city, dogs were pets on leashes. This was a beast. But she saw how the dog placed himself between her and the man holding her, angling his body to create a barrier. She realized the monster wasn't there to hurt her. He was there to eat the man who was hurting her. She took a breath, a small, shaky breath. And she did the bravest thing she had ever done. She went limp. She stopped trying to pull away and simply let her weight drop, becoming dead weight on Bruno's arm. It was a passive resistance technique, perhaps instinctual, perhaps seen in a movie. Bruno cursed, stumbled, and had to use both hands to haul her up, breaking his posture. "Get up, you little brat!" he yelled, raising his hand as if to strike her. The atmosphere snapped. Marcus moved. He didn't strike. He intercepted. His hand shot out with the speed of a striking viper. He caught Bruno's raised wrist in midair, inches from the girl's face. The sound of the catch was a solid thwack of flesh on flesh. Marcus's grip was hydraulic. He squeezed. He pressed his thumb into the pressure point on the inside of the wrist, the median nerve. Bruno gasped, his knees buckling as pain shot up his arm like an electric shock. He looked at Marcus in disbelief. He tried to pull his arm back, but it was like trying to pull away from a statue. "You touch her," Marcus said, his voice calm, conversational, terrifying, "and the dog won't be the one you have to worry about." The crowd around them began to notice. The bubble of silence expanded. A fisherman stopped loading his net. A woman selling fruit paused. They looked. They saw the gringo holding the local thug. They saw the crying girl. The dynamic of the dock was shifting. Witnesses were gathering. Bruno realized he was losing control. He was losing the crowd, losing the girl, and losing the physical confrontation. Desperation set in. With his free hand, the left one, Bruno reached behind his back. He wasn't going for the gun in the waistband. He was going for a knife in his back pocket. A flick knife. Marcus saw the shoulder dip. He saw the rotation of the torso. He didn't wait for the blade. He twisted Bruno's trapped wrist, forcing the man to rotate away from the girl. "Max," Marcus said. A single word. The release code. "Watch." The dog stepped closer, his nose inches from Bruno's leg. He didn't bite yet. He opened his mouth and snapped the air, a sound like a gunshot, right next to the man's femoral artery. Bruno froze completely. Knife forgotten. Gun forgotten. He was trapped between a giant who could break his wrist like a twig and a beast that could sever his leg. Let her go. Marcus articulated each word separately. Bruno's fingers, white and cramping, finally opened. He released the girl's other hand. She didn't wait. She scrambled backward, falling onto the dirty wood of the dock, scuttling away crab-like until she bumped into Marcus's legs. She grabbed his cargo pants, burying her face in the fabric, sobbing. Marcus didn't look down. He kept his eyes on the predator. He released Bruno's wrist with a shove that sent the man stumbling back 3 steps. "Leave," Marcus said, "before I change my mind about the dog." But Bruno didn't leave. The humiliation was too great. The crowd was watching. His reputation on the river was at stake. He recovered his balance. He rubbed his wrist. His eyes went to the boat, then back to Marcus. Hate replaced fear. "You're dead, gringo," Bruno hissed. "You don't know who you just stole from. You're a dead man walking." He turned and ran. Not to the boat, but toward the favela that lined the riverbank, disappearing into the maze of shacks. He was going for reinforcements, or a bigger gun. Marcus looked down at the girl clinging to his leg. He looked at the crowd, who were now staring with a mix of awe and fear. He knew what Bruno meant. This wasn't over. He had won the standoff, but he had started a hunt. He scooped the girl up in one arm, she was light, trembling, and grabbed his fuel cans with the other. "Max, heel. We're moving." They needed to get to the skiff. They needed to get off the X. Because in 10 minutes, that dock was going to be swarming with men who didn't care about hand signals or heroes. The walk back to the boat was a blur of calculated movement. Marcus didn't run. Running attracts attention. Running triggers the predator drive in the crowd. But he moved with a long, devouring stride that covered ground at an impossible pace. He held the girl against his chest with his left arm, her small face buried in the crook of his neck, her tears soaking his tactical shirt. In his right hand, the 2 heavy jerry cans of fuel acted as a counterweight, swinging rhythmically. Max was the rear guard, walking backward every few steps, his teeth bared at anyone who looked at them too long. The market, which minutes before had been a place of commerce, now felt like a cage closing in. The eyes of the vendors and fishermen weren't friendly. In a lawless town, disrupting the status quo is a sin. Marcus had humiliated a local enforcer, and the jungle has a way of punishing outsiders who think they are the law. He could feel the cell phones coming out, the text messages flying, the network of lookouts activating. He had to get off the X. They reached the wooden ladder leading down to the water. Marcus handed the fuel cans down to the boat first, then swung his legs over the side, dropping into the aluminum hull of the skiff with a hollow clang. He placed the girl gently on the middle bench. She immediately curled into a ball, pulling her knees up, making herself as small as possible. She was shaking violently, the adrenaline crash hitting her tiny system with the force of a hammer. "Max, load up," Marcus ordered. The dog leaped from the dock, landing gracefully on the bow. He didn't sit. He stood facing the dock, scanning the crowd above, a sentinel guarding the castle gate. Marcus moved to the stern. He primed the fuel bulb. He wrapped the starter cord around his hand. In movies, engines start instantly. In the humid, maintenance-starved reality of the Amazon, nothing is guaranteed. He pulled. The engine coughed and died. Marcus cursed silently. He looked up at the dock. Movement. 3 men were running down the main plankway. One of them was Bruno, clutching his wrist. The other 2 were armed, one with a machete, the other with a short-barreled shotgun. They were shouting, pointing at the boat. Marcus pulled the cord again. He put his back into it, using the core rotation of his torso. The engine roared to life, a cloud of blue smoke erupting from the exhaust. "Sit down!" Marcus yelled to the girl. He didn't wait to untie the mooring rope. He pulled his knife and slashed the line. The boat drifted free, caught immediately by the strong current. The men on the dock reached the edge. The one with the shotgun raised the weapon. Marcus slammed the throttle open. The bow of the skiff lifted toward the sky, the propeller biting into the brown water, churning it into white foam. The boat surged forward, throwing Marcus back against the tiller. A splash in the water, 10 yards to the left. Then the delayed sound of the gunshot rolling over the water. They were firing. Marcus didn't weave. Speed was safety. He kept the throttle pinned, driving the boat straight toward the main channel, putting distance and obstacles between him and the shooters. He rounded the first bend of the river, putting a thick wall of mangrove trees between the skiff and the port. The gunfire stopped. They were out of line of sight, but they weren't safe. Marcus knew how these groups operated. They had radios. They had faster boats. A wooden skiff with a 40-horsepower engine couldn't outrun a drug runner's interceptor. He needed to disappear. He needed to get off the main highway of the river and vanish into the veins of the forest. He piloted the boat for 20 minutes at full speed, the wind tearing at his face, drying the sweat. He constantly checked his six, his rear. Max was doing the same, his nose testing the wind for the scent of other engines burning rich fuel. When he was sure they weren't being immediately tailed, Marcus slowed the boat. He guided it into a narrow, overgrown igarapé, a tributary shielded by a canopy of vines. He killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was heavy, broken only by the sound of the boat gliding through lily pads. He drifted until the boat nudged a mud bank He threw the anchor. Then, he turned to the girl. She was still curled on the bench. She looked like a broken doll in her expensive pink dress, now stained with grease and river water. Marcus moved slowly. He opened a storage locker and pulled out a wool blanket and a bottle of water. He approached her, kneeling on the deck. "Hey," he said softly. "We're safe. They can't see us here." She looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen. She looked at the green wall of the jungle surrounding them, then at Marcus. "They have radios," she whispered. Her voice was educated, city-accented. "Bruno, the bad man. He called someone. Before we got to the dock, he said the package was ready." Marcus felt a cold weight in his stomach. Package. She was merchandise. High-value merchandise. "What is your name?" Marcus asked. "Sophia," she said. "I live in Manaus. My dad is a judge. They took me from school. A judge's daughter. Kidnapped for leverage or ransom." That explained the clean clothes, the expensive shoes, and the desperation of the kidnappers. Marcus had stumbled into a high-stakes political kidnapping. The men chasing them weren't just local thugs. They were soldiers for a syndicate. "Okay, Sophia," Marcus said, his voice projecting a calm he didn't feel. "My name is Marcus, and that big dog is Max. We're going to get you home, but first, we need to hide." He handed her the water. She drank thirstily, choking a little. "Are you a policeman?" she asked, looking at his tactical vest and the knife. "No," Marcus said. "I'm just a guy who saw a signal." "My mom taught me," she said, a fresh tear rolling down her cheek. "She said if I was ever in trouble, I should do the hand thing. I did it to 3 other people. They just looked away." "Why did you stop?" Marcus looked at her. He thought about the men who looked away. He thought about the gray man theory of survival. Blend in, don't engage. It was a good theory for staying alive. It was a terrible theory for being human. "Because you asked," Marcus said simply. "And Max doesn't like bullies." Max heard his name and trotted over. He squeezed into the small space between Marcus and Sophia, resting his chin on the girl's knee. She buried her hands in his fur. Marcus looked at the sky. The afternoon storms were building again. Heavy purple clouds were stacking up on the horizon. He had a choice. He could try to run for the nearest city, hours away, exposed on the open water. Or he could go to ground. He could go back to his shack, fortify, and wait for the extraction window. If they were hunting him, they would expect him to run. They would be watching the river checkpoints. They wouldn't expect him to dig in. "We're going to my house," Marcus told her. "It's safe there. We have food. We have walls. We wait out the storm, and then I call your father." He restarted the engine, keeping the RPMs low to minimize noise. He navigated the back channels, the secret routes he had mapped over the last year. He was driving deeper into the wild, taking the judge's daughter into the heart of the darkness to keep her safe. As the boat cut through the black water, Marcus realized the irony. He had spent his life fighting to protect the borders of his country. Now, his border was a 6-year-old girl in a pink dress, and the enemy was everyone else. The hidden inlet where Marcus lived was a geographical anomaly, a pocket of deep, still water shielded by a curtain of hanging moss and ancient ironwood trees. To the untrained eye, the entrance looked like a solid wall of vegetation. To Marcus, it was the front gate of his fortress. He killed the engine 50 yards out, letting the skiff drift silently through the green veil, the aluminum hull parting the lily pads with a soft, wet hiss. Sophia sat frozen on the bench, clutching the blanket. The jungle around them was waking up for the night shift. The croaking of frogs, the splash of fish feeding, the distant mournful call of a potu bird to a girl raised in air-conditioned apartments and shopping malls, these were the sounds of nightmares. She looked up at the stilt house looming out of the shadows. It didn't look like a home, with its jagged tin roof and dark unpainted wood. It looked like a witch's hovel from a fairy tale. "Is this where you live?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not pretty," Marcus said, stepping into the shallow water to guide the boat into its slip. "But it's dry, and it has thick walls." He tied off the boat. Max leaped onto the wooden walkway first, shaking the water from his coat, his nails clicking a rhythm of inspection. He sniffed the air, checking the perimeter for any scent that didn't belong, jaguar, snake, or man. He gave a short, low woof, the all-clear signal. Marcus lifted Sophia out of the boat. She was light, too light. The stress of the abduction had stripped the color from her face. He carried her up the narrow stairs, feeling her small hands grip his tactical vest. For a man who had spent decades carrying rucksacks full of explosives and wounded men, carrying a child felt strangely terrifying. She was fragile cargo. Inside, the shack was oven-hot from the day's sun. Marcus set her down on his cot. He moved quickly, enacting the lockdown protocol. He didn't turn on the main lantern. He switched on a small red-lens tactical light that bathed the room in a bloody, submarine-like glow. Red light preserves night vision and doesn't carry far through the trees. He moved to the windows. He didn't just close the shutters. He engaged the heavy steel crossbars he had fabricated from scrap metal. Clang, clack. The sound was heavy, industrial. Sophia watched him with wide eyes. "Why are you locking us in?" she asked. "I'm not locking us in," Marcus said, checking the feed on his AR-15 magazine. "I'm locking them out." He walked over to the kitchen area. He needed to normalize the situation. Panic is contagious, and a panicked child is a liability. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I haven't eaten since the school." Marcus opened a crate. He bypassed his MREs, meals ready to eat. Spicy chili mac wasn't comfort food. He found a tin of peaches and a packet of crackers. He opened the tin with his knife and handed it to her with a spoon. "Peaches," he said. "Sugar is good for the brain." She took a bite. The sweetness seemed to bring her back to reality. She ate voraciously. Max walked over to her. He didn't beg. He simply sat down next to the cot, facing the door, his back to her. It was a position of guardianship. He was placing his body between the threat and the asset. Sophia reached out and touched his ear. Max leaned into the touch, letting out a contented sigh. Marcus sat on a crate across the room, stripping down his 12-gauge shotgun to clean the river moisture from the action. "Sophia," he said, keeping his voice level, "I need you to tell me exactly what you heard Bruno say on the phone. Everything, even if it doesn't make sense." She swallowed a mouthful of peaches. She thought, he spoke to a man. He called him Duter, doctor. He said, "The package is secure at the port. We are moving to the transfer point." Then he listened. Then he got angry. He said, "The girl is crying too much. People are looking." The doctor yelled at him. I could hear it. He said, "If you lose her, don't come back. The buyer is waiting in Colombia." Marcus nodded slowly. The picture was clearing up. The doctor was likely the middleman or the strategist. The buyer in Colombia confirmed this was cross-border trafficking, high-end ransom, or worse. If Bruno had failed to deliver the package at the port, the doctor would be sending a cleanup crew. They wouldn't just be looking for a lost boat. They would be tracking the GPS signature of Bruno's phone, if he was smart enough to have one, or simply sweeping the river sectors. Marcus looked at the radio on his shelf. He could try to call the federal police again, like he did with the plane incident. But the storm clouds were thick, interfering with the HF signal, and open comms were dangerous. The cartels monitored the police frequencies. If he broadcasted his location, he might be inviting the wolf to the door. Silence was his best armor right now. "Okay," Marcus said. "Here are the rules of the house. Rule 1, you stay away from the windows. Rule 2, if Max barks, you get under this bed and you stay there until I tell you to come out. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "Are you going to shoot the bad men?" The question hung in the red air. It was too innocent and too brutal. "I'm going to make sure they don't touch you." Marcus evaded. "Get some sleep, Sophia. Max will watch you." She lay down, pulling the rough wool blanket up to her chin. Within minutes, the exhaustion of the trauma took over, and she was asleep. Marcus stood up. He walked to the door and cracked it open an inch. The storm had fully arrived. The rain was hammering the jungle, a deafening white noise that masked all other sounds. He stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him to keep the light in. He stood in the dark, the rain soaking his shirt instantly. He reached into a bucket of scrap metal and pulled out a spool of fishing line and a handful of empty tin cans. He moved to the top of the stairs leading up from the dock. He crouched, his fingers working nimbly in the dark. He rigged a tripwire. He strung the fishing line across the stairs, ankle height. He tied the cans to the railing, filled with a few loose screws. It was primitive. It was low-tech. But if anyone tried to sneak up those stairs, the rattle would be louder than a gunshot to Marcus's tuned ears. He moved to the corners of the porch. He set up punji sticks, sharpened bamboo stakes angled outward, hidden in the decorative ferns he kept in pots. Anyone vaulting the railing would impale their hands or thighs. He was turning the shack into a porcupine. He went back inside, dripping wet. Max looked up from the floor. Perimeter set. Marcus whispered to the dog. He sat in the chair facing the door, the AR-15 across his lap. He didn't sleep. He entered the operator's trance, a state of suspended animation where the body rests, but the senses remain at 100%. The girl was sleeping. The dog was watching. The storm was raging. And somewhere out there, in the black rain, boats were moving. Marcus knew Bruno wasn't the problem anymore. Bruno was an amateur. The men the doctor would send, they would be professionals. They would have night vision. They would have suppressors. Marcus touched the scar on his neck. Let them come, he thought. I've been waiting for a reason to fight back. The storm broke around 300 hours. The heavy drumming of the rain faded into a sporadic dripping, leaving the jungle in a state of suspended animation. The silence that followed was heavy, amplified by the humidity. Inside the shack, the air was thick and warm. Sophia was sleeping deeply, a small lump under the wool blanket. Max was awake, lying by the bed, his ears rotating like radar dishes, filtering the noises of the night. Marcus sat in the chair, his breathing shallow and rhythmic. He wasn't asleep, but he wasn't fully awake in the civilian sense. He was drifting in the alpha state, a level of consciousness where reaction times are instantaneous. Then, it happened. It wasn't a footstep. It was a metallic clatter. Clank, clank, rattle. The tin cans tied to the stair railing danced against the wood. It was a crude sound, almost comical, like a child's toy, but to Marcus, it was a thunderclap. Someone was on the stairs, and they weren't trying to be loud. They had tripped. Marcus moved. He didn't stand up immediately. He slid out of the chair, dropping to one knee to lower his silhouette. He reached out and touched Max's shoulder. Quiet, he signaled with a hand pressure. Max stiffened but didn't bark. The dog knew the game. Ambush mode. Marcus moved to the wall beside the front door. He listened. The rattling had stopped. The intruders had frozen, realizing they had blown their stealth approach. Now, they would rush. He heard the creak of weight shifting on the wet porch planks. 3 distinct points of pressure. 3 men. A whisper outside. It's just trash. Move up. Door breach on 3. They were going to kick it. Marcus didn't wait for them to act. He seized the initiative. The best defense is a violent, unexpected offense. He threw the deadbolt open with a loud, metallic clack. He didn't open the door. He kicked it open from the inside, sending the heavy wood swinging outward with tremendous force. The door slammed into the lead man who was preparing to breach, hitting him square in the face. There was a wet crunch of cartilage breaking and a stifled cry. Marcus surged into the doorway. He wasn't holding the rifle. In this range, a long gun could be grabbed. He held his tactical tomahawk in his right hand and a high-lumen strobe light in his left. He hit the strobe. Flash, flash, flash. The blinding white light strobed at 20 flashes per second, a frequency designed to overload the optic nerve and induce disorientation. The 3 men on the porch threw their hands up, blinded. They were wearing night vision goggles, cheap ones. The strobe light hitting the intensified tubes would be like looking into the sun. They screamed, ripping the goggles off their faces. Marcus stepped out. He was a shadow moving inside the light. He used the flat of the tomahawk blade to strike the first man in the solar plexus, folding him in half. The man dropped, gasping for air. The second man, the one Bruno had likely sent, swung a machete blindly. Marcus blocked the swing with his forearm guard and drove his knee into the man's thigh, targeting the common peroneal nerve. The leg went dead. The man collapsed. The third man, standing at the top of the stairs, fumbled for a pistol in his belt. Marcus didn't strike him. He simply advanced, occupying the space. He shoved the man hard in the chest. Physics took over. The man flew backward, arms pinwheeling, and tumbled down the steep wooden stairs, crashing into the mud below with a splash. Silence returned to the porch, broken only by the groans of the two men writhing on the deck. It had taken 6 seconds. Marcus stood over them, the tomahawk relaxed by his side. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a nightmare they had accidentally woken up. "Who sent you?" Marcus asked. His voice wasn't loud. It was intimate. The man on the floor, the one with the broken nose, gasped. "The doctor," he said. "No witnesses." "The doctor made a miscalculation," Marcus said. "He assumed I was a witness. I'm not a witness. I'm a hazard." Inside the house, Sophia woke up. "Marcus?" Her small voice drifted out. Marcus turned his head slightly, keeping his eyes on the prisoners. "Stay inside, Sophia. Max is with you. It's just, I'm taking out the trash." Max appeared in the doorway. The dog looked at the men on the floor, then at Marcus. He didn't need to attack. The fight was over. He just stood there, a silent reinforcement, daring anyone to move. Marcus grabbed the two men on the porch by their collars. He dragged them to the edge of the stairs and threw them down into the mud to join their friend. "Go back," Marcus called down to the writhing heap of bodies in the dark. "Tell Bruno, and tell the doctor. If they come back, I won't use the flat of the blade. I'll use the edge." He heard them scrambling in the mud, splashing back toward their boat hidden in the mangroves. The sound of an engine starting up, panicked and high-pitched, faded into the distance. Marcus stood on the porch for a long time, watching the river. The strobe light was off. The darkness was his friend again. He checked his own pulse. Steady. He looked at the tripwire cans. They had done their job. He turned and went back inside. Sophia was sitting up in the cot, hugging her knees. "Did they go away?" she asked. "Yes," Marcus said, locking the deadbolt again. "They tripped." He sat down heavily on the crate. The immediate threat was gone, pushed back by violence. But the strategic situation had changed. The doctor now knew that Marcus wasn't just a random gringo. He knew Marcus was an operator. That meant the next team wouldn't be thugs with machetes. It would be a hit squad. Marcus looked at the girl. He couldn't keep her here. The shack was burned. He had to move. He had to go on the offensive. He looked at the radio on the shelf. The storm had passed. The atmospheric interference would be gone. It was time to make a call, not to the police, but to the one contact he had kept from his old life, a ghost line. "Pack your things, Sophia," Marcus said gently. "We're going on a trip at first light." "Where?" she asked. "To the city," Marcus said. "We're going to find your father, and I'm going to introduce him to the men who took you." The sun rose over the Rio Negro like a bruised eye, casting a reddish-purple light over the dark waters. Marcus pushed the skiff hard, the engine humming a high-pitched drone that vibrated through the hull. They were no longer in the hidden veins of the forest. They were on the main artery, heading straight for the heart of the beast, the city. Sophia sat in the bow, wrapped in Marcus's poncho. She wasn't sleeping. She was watching the skyline of Manaus appear on the horizon, a jagged line of concrete and glass rising out of the green ocean. To her, it was home. To Marcus, it was a different kind of jungle, one filled with predators who wore suits and smiled for cameras. He hadn't called the police. Bruno's panicked confession about the doctor and the mention of a buyer in Colombia suggested a sophisticated network. The local police could be compromised. Instead, Marcus had used his satellite phone, a piece of kit he kept buried in a waterproof drum, to call a number that didn't exist in any phone book. It was a ghost line, a direct relay to a contact he had from his days working joint task forces in the tri-border area. He gave them coordinates, a name, the judge, and a threat assessment. The wheels were turning. He steered the boat away from the main public docks. He aimed for an industrial pier on the outskirts, a place of rusting cranes and shipping containers. "We're here!" Marcus shouted over the wind. Sophia looked at the grim industrial landscape. "My dad isn't here," she said, confused. He's coming, Marcus promised. I told him where to meet us. Marcus docked the boat behind a rusting barge, hidden from the main river traffic. He tied off the line and helped Sophia onto the concrete. The ground didn't sway like the boat. It felt hard and unforgiving. Max jumped up, positioning himself between Sophia and the open expanse of the dockyard. The dog was on high alert, the urban smells of oil, rust, and old fish overloading his senses. They waited. 10 minutes passed. The sun climbed higher, baking the concrete. Then a convoy appeared. 3 black SUVs, unmarked, moving with aggressive speed. They screeched to a halt 50 yards away. Doors flew open. Men in suits with earpieces stepped out, hands hovering near holsters. Federal agents, not local cops, the heavy hitters. From the middle vehicle, a man emerged. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in jeans and a t-shirt, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. It was Judge Alencar. Sophia screamed. "Daddy!" She broke formation. She ran across the cracked concrete, her small legs pumping. The judge ran to meet her. He fell to his knees, ignoring the dirt, and caught her. The impact of their embrace was visible, a collision of relief and grief. He buried his face in her hair, sobbing, checking her arms, her face, making sure she was real. The agents formed a perimeter, scanning the area. They saw Marcus standing by the boat, a giant in dirty tactical gear, with a wolf dog at his side. They raised their weapons. "Hold fire!" the judge screamed, standing up but keeping Sophia glued to his hip. "He's the one who called. Stand down!" The agents lowered their rifles but didn't holster them. They looked at Marcus with professional suspicion. He looked like a mercenary, a rogue element. The judge walked toward Marcus. He stopped 5 feet away. He looked at the scar on Marcus's neck, the calm demeanor of the dog, the efficient way Marcus held himself. "You brought her back," the judge said, his voice thick with emotion. "They told me she was gone. They said, the doctor doesn't leave loose ends." "The doctor underestimates the variables," Marcus said calmly. "He forgot to account for the girl." Marcus reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, a map he had drawn of the river sector where Bruno had fled. "This is where they are staging," Marcus said, handing the paper to the judge. "The shack they ran to. It's a transfer point. If you hit it within the hour, you catch the crew before they cross the border." The judge took the map. He looked at it, then at Marcus. "Why?" the judge asked. "Why did you get involved? You could have walked away at the market." Marcus looked at Sophia. She was safe, surrounded by agents, but she was looking back at him. She raised her hand and gave a small, shy wave. "She asked," Marcus said. She signaled. "Most people pretend they don't see. I don't possess that luxury anymore." The judge reached for his wallet. Marcus stopped him with a raised hand. "No money," Marcus said. "Just a favor. My face, my name. It stays out of the report. I was never here. A fisherman found her. A tourist. Anyone but me." The judge understood. He nodded solemnly. "You have my word. You are a ghost." Marcus whistled to Max. "Load up." The dog jumped back into the skiff. Marcus stepped aboard and untied the line. "Wait!" Sophia broke away from her father again. She ran to the edge of the dock. She looked down at Marcus. She didn't have a toy or a charm to give him like in the stories. She had something else. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You and the wolf. You are the good monsters." Marcus smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "Be safe, Sophia. Watch your surroundings." He pulled the start cord. The engine fired up. He backed the boat out, spinning the bow toward the open river. He didn't look back as he throttled up. He drove toward the sun, heading back to the isolation of the jungle. The mission was a success. The package was delivered. But as the city faded behind him, Marcus knew the truth. He wasn't just going back to a shack. He was going back to a war. The doctor would lose his crew today when the feds hit the camp, and he would know who was responsible. Marcus touched the scar on his neck. "Good," he thought. "Let him come. I'm just getting warmed up."